Let's cultivate our motivation. So bodhicitta is said to be cooling like the moon. It's on a full moon night. The sky is clear and the moon it's bright, but it's a very cooling energy. The sun is a warm energy, a warm kind of light. So bodhicitta is cooling in this way, and meaning that it cools anger and frustration and hatred. It cools restlessness. It cools agitation, excitement, giddiness. It cools the pain of jealousy. So if we want to subdue our mind and cool our mind, collect our mind so it's not flying all over the universe, thinking of so many things, then anchor it to bodhicitta. And let the cooling energy of compassion settle the mind. So with a settled mind, then let's aim for full awakening and do our best to keep our minds settled, to keep our minds on track. As we go through the day with bodhicitta. Okay, so we were at definitions, divisions, and illustrations, right? Oh, one more thing. So I didn't express my query last week very well, but anyway, it was very good. It got some people thinking, and some people did some research about illustrations and sent material to me. So that's good. I ask you, please, if you have homework or you have material, send it on Wednesday at the latest. If you send it on Thursday afternoon, I may not see it on the email until after class, and even if I see it, I don't have time to read it and incorporate it into the evening teaching. So please send it on Wednesday at the latest. My question last week was, if they say that the definition is the thing, then what in the world does that mean? Okay, so what I thought, I've been thinking about it this week, and what I think it kind of means is that the definition is pointing out to you what the object is, or what that type of object is, and they call it a substantial existent because it's something that performs a function. Okay, so my question is, why is the definition a substantial existent? Because we usually think of definitions as like all this verbiage that's describing something, but if he says it's the real thing, well, the real thing isn't there when you hear the words. So the only thing I can conclude is, they want to differentiate between the definiendum being an imputed existent and the definition meaning the actual object, and the actual object being a substantial existent. Okay, so I think that was what I was pondering last time. The thing about illustrations is, I think we read it, but I think it's good if we go over this again. Should we just start with the definitions section again? Yeah, because this can get a little bit confusing in here. So that's just when it says definition. Yeah. Also, because some of the exercises that he has us do later on are referring back to this section, so it's good if we go through it again. Okay, so a definition exists in relation to its definiendum. Normally, we think of a definition as a string of words that captures and expresses very clearly exactly what is meant by a term. That term is the definiendum, the thing defined. In this way of thinking of definitions and the definienda, both the definition and the definiendum are words, and we use these words to refer to the things in the world. In the Buddhist way of thinking, the definienda are still words, handy labels for things, but the definitions are the real things themselves. So that's the sentence that confused me. When you say the definition, which is, what I'm reading, is the thing itself. Well, what I'm reading is not the thing itself. So it's, it's referring to the thing itself. So I don't know, we've got to find better English words for describing what he means here. Are you getting what I'm saying?
I was wondering if this, what it was I was trying to understand, is it talking about like the label and the basis? And the definition is the basis of the label?
It's not exactly like that. The definition is the meaning of the object. Yeah, it is the object, and the definienda is the label. Yeah, the basis of designation is not the object. Okay, and that's what gets refuted when we get into meditation on emptiness. And because that's our problem, we confuse the basis of designation with the object. But here we're talking about, definienda, the label, but the definition, which is really going into the meaning of the object. Yeah, what the object means. Okay. For instance, there is a definition of pot, a bulbous, flat-based phenomena able to perform the function of holding water. Okay. According to this definition, the nature of a pot is to be a bulbous, flat-based phenomena, and the function of a pot is to be able to hold water. So often in when we hear definitions, it talks about the characteristics and the function. Okay? So those two things come a lot in the definitions of things. So in the Buddhist way of thinking of definition and definienda, a bulbous, flat-based phenomena able to perform the function of holding water is a real thing. Okay? Like the kind of thing found in your kitchen, not just a string of words that describes a pot. Okay, so it's a real thing, like the kind of thing found in your kitchen. So this is what's confusing. Yeah. Okay, but anyway, let's just remember it's referring to the thing. And because this is a Tantrika school, yeah, the thing that's being referred to truly exists, inherently exists. And remember, it ultimately exists because in Satantrika, impermanent things are functional phenomena, and they ultimately exist because they're ultimately able to perform a function. So it's the complete opposite of the other tenet systems. Okay? But you can see how it makes sense in its own way. It exists substantially as a real thing. On the other hand, a definiendum, such as a pot, is called an imputed existent. A definiendum is an imputed existent because it is just the name imputed to its own particular definition, the things with those characteristics. However, because of the way pervasion works, do not take this to mean that whatever may be referred to by any particular definiendum, like a pot, a functioning thing, an existent, and so on, is necessarily a name. Okay, so the definiendum is an imputed existence because it is a name, yeah, but the object that word is referring to is not an imputed existent. It's not just a word, it's a substantial existent. Okay? So, for instance, a pot is not a name. You don't, you boil water in a name. You boil water in a pot. Okay? So a pot is not a name, a mere sound, but it is a tangible object. However, the word pot is a name or conventionality commonly accepted as meaning something along the lines of a bulbous flat base phenomena able to perform the function of holding water. Okay. I'm quite curious. A couple of you know Tibetan than I do. What's the word for cup? Or glass or anything? Because I'm wondering, because bumpa, is what is the Tibetan word that they're using for pot. Yeah. Bumpa is also a vase, and it's, that flat bulbous water holder that they do rituals from. That's a bumpa. I don't know the word for cup, but would they call cup bumpa? I wonder. It fits the definition of bumpa. Yeah. So it fits the definition. But, so I was thinking in different languages, what you choose as an illustration of that object might, like in English, might have might refer to many different things. Like in English, you have the word cup, you have the word, well, if you have the definition, flat bottom bulbous base water holder, this fits it. Yeah, but in English, we wouldn't call this a pot. Yeah, we would call it a cup. There's other flat base bulbous belly water holders that we would call a jar, or a jug, or a pitcher.
One of Jeffrey's dictionaries has kayu.
What?
Kayu?
Kayu? Kayu. I've never heard of that. Anyway, so in different languages, maybe there's one word that refers to all these different things that in English we have different words for. Yeah, because his example of, using pot and flat base bulbous berry water, that definition. We'll just call it the bulbous, okay? And he's saying the bulbous, okay, there's many things that fulfill the definition of being that bulbous thing, but not all of them would we give the name pot to. Yeah. So, in different languages, it's going to be different according to, how people think. and the language is also indicative of the kind of environment that the people live in and how they configure the things around them, you know. And I don't know how many different words there are in Eskimo language for snow, but a lot, and we just have snow. Yeah. So what may fulfill our definition in snow may fulfill the definition of many of the words in Eskimo, in Inuit language, you know, and they would have many, many words for it. So it's just something to think about, you know, and how different cultures are, how different people are, and how their language reflects how those people think and what they think about. Yeah, and the environment they live in. And, yeah, you know, whether it's a philosophical language or an emotional language or I mean, it really indicates a lot about what's taken for granted that people will understand. Yeah, how the people think, what they think about. Because, you know, when I heard in Chinese, I'm getting off the track here, but, you know, in Chinese, they don't have past, present, and future verbs. It's just one verb. And then you know by the context what it is. I think in English, we would get really, really confused because we're so used to hearing specifically that we don't have the mind that thinks in nuances according to how it is. So how, in Chinese, how do you figure that out? Or is it just, it's something you grew up with, so you don't think about it? It's just quite natural yeah.
You have time markers, right? Yesterday, today, those will tell you.
Oh, okay. So you do have time markers, but yeah. But we do a lot of it by just the verb conjugation itself. Yeah. So anyway, you know, I'm saying all this because sometimes what's being explained, we may have questions about, and the questions may have to do with simply the fact that we're dealing with different languages and different cultures that think in different ways.
I looked up the definition for cup, pot, vase, jug,
Uh-huh.
and they're all very similar to the definition in the book. They're just like one or two words off in each definition.
But even if it's just a few words of a definition, you know, it's enough so that we recognize, yeah, if you read one of the definitions out, hopefully we would be able to see which one it is, what is the definiendum of that definition. So give us one and we'll see if we can do that.
A small bowl-shaped container for drinking from, typically having a handle.
Yeah, that would be a cup. Or a mug.
A cup.
A cup
is correct. What is a cup?
Cup. A mug might be, instead of a small thing, a bigger one.
A large cylindrical cup, typically
Cylindrical. A mug, is what, for the definition of cup? Or mug?
It's a specific kind of cup.
Yeah.
Without the saucer.
Do mugs, are they always cylindrical? Are cups aren't always cylindrical? No, they aren't. You can have, yeah. Yeah. We have some cups that are kind of squarish. I've never seen a triangular one.
Why bulbous though?
Bulbous because it's fat.
But why is the umbrella definition for all the different kind of vessels? Why bulbous?
Because it's fat. It's bulbous means it.
Oh, because I see it's kind of roundish.
Yeah, it's round on the sides. That's what bulbous means. Yeah, flat based is here. Bulbous bellied is here.
It's not bulbous. It's not bulbous. Bulbous would be this.
Okay. Yeah. So then we also have bowls too. That might fit those definitions, except bowls don't usually have handles. Yeah. So To define a cup, you would add usually with a handle. Although there are some cups that don't have handles. Do we call those cups? Or do we have another name for them? We had one that we used for offering water to His Holiness, a round one like this.
Yeah, the definition of the cup saying typically having a handle.
Yeah,
So this is atypical.
that cuts you some slack. It can not have a handle.
I don't know when cylindrical cups began to be made, but if you look at ancient pottery, that's where the bulbousness comes from.
Right.
The bowls are like that, and all the utensils are like that. So it could well have been cup 1,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Except if you have a big cup, they would probably call a jug, although a jug often goes up in the middle and has a smaller spout. Yeah. Anyway, okay. So, however, the word pot is a name or conventionality commonly accepted as meaning something along the lines of a flat base of a bulbous. Of a flat-based bubbles belly water holder. The collected topics logicians present naming as an essentially arbitrary process and names as mere conventionalities, and that's really true. Yeah. But part of our problem in our life is that we don't regard names as mere conventionalities, as things that we made up. Yeah, we impute meaning to them and think that everybody has that same meaning. And then, like or dislike how they use a certain word. We get quite hung up on words. And, lawyers. Talk about, lawyers and book editors. Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Insurance companies, yeah, that's true. Okay. Whatever exists is suitable to be designated by any name, and we just agree to call something by a particular name to follow the established pattern. The name for anything is merely imputed to that thing, just added onto it or ascribed to it. If the name were a part of the thing in and of itself, we would all call it the same thing. However, since there are many languages, we can see that this is not the case. For some things that are unique, like particular places, we all call it the same thing. However, here too, we can see that the name is not built into the thing, for if it were, no one would have to ask what it is. We would all know what the name is. But you can see this whole thing, how arbitrary it is. Can you, in your own experience, tell the difference between a town and a village? Or between a town and a city? We know a city is larger than a town, but in your own experience, as you drive around and go into different places, okay, Newport's a town, it's tiny. We know Spokane is a city, it's big. But there's places in between, like Deer Park. Is it a town or is it a city? Yeah. And what's the difference between a village and a town? Are we clear about that? Or do villages only exist in Europe and towns exist in America? Or villages only exist, in other countries or in previous times, but now those places have become towns?
This question has plagued me for a long time because the town I grew up in was called Plain City, but it was classified as a village by population. And I never understood that. And I think now it's a town.
Uh-huh.
Who knows?
Yeah, so I don't know if they have cutoff points for population, Or is it physical area? Or is it the amount of industry there? Yeah, or is it the number of houses? It's yeah.
I think it's a few factors, and one of the main is population, number of people living there.
Mm-hmm.
Like under, let's say in Russia, under 10 or 12,000 people. I don't remember actually. Is it either town or village?
Mm.
And above it's something bigger.
Yeah, because I usually think of village as something smaller than a town.
Village is small.
Yeah. But can you absolutely, is Newport a village? We don't call things villages in America. Yeah, village is quaint. Yeah, a small village. Yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm.
I found a definition for village here like this: a group of houses and associated buildings larger than a hamlet and smaller than a town, situated in a rural area. Yeah. Plus, I think when you go into Newport, the sign probably says City of Newport.
Oh, it might say City of Newport, yeah.
Oh, in the U.S., a small municipality with limited corporate powers.
And a hamlet? Is Country Road a hamlet? Are we I don't know. Yes. And Country Lane is smaller than Newport. Okay.
Strictly without the church. Hamlet, strictly without the church.
Without a church? Really?
In Britain.
Huh?
In Britain.
In Britain. Oh, but Plum Village has hamlets, and it's a big church, isn't it? It's a Buddhist church. Anyway, okay. But the point here is, do you see how words are just talking about general things and how they are not the object, and how we can get very hung up on words and what you call things. Like the difference between a minor and an adult. Yeah, it's 1 split second, but where you draw that split second, I don't know. Yeah. But your whole life could depend on it. Okay. The first part of understanding a definition, which might also be called a characterizer, and its definiendum, or that which is characterized, is to identify the essential characteristics of that defining phenomenon, the characteristics we refer to by that handy name. The second part is to identify the measure, range, or extent of that definition, and to assure ourselves that the range of that particular definition coordinates exactly with the range of the things referred to by that particular definiendum. I think you're going to get into trouble there if you think that it's going to correlate exactly, because just our discussion about village and town and city, demonstrated you can't correlate it exactly. This means that any particular definition and its definiendum must be mutually inclusive. That is, they must be different and mutually pervasive. Okay, so here it's worded, and listen to the wording. Any particular definition and its definiendum must be mutually inclusive. Okay. Recall that any two phenomena that are different are existents that are not exactly the same in both name and meaning. Any appropriate definition and its definiendum are certainly different in name, but their meaning, all the phenomena that they include, or all those things to which their names may properly refer, must be just the same. Okay? This does not back off the idea of a definition as a substantial existence, not just a name. Think of it in terms of of privation. Whatever is a bulbous is necessarily a pot, and vice versa. Whatever is a pot is never is necessarily a bulbous. Remember, bulbous means that whole long definition. Or perhaps everything referred to as a bulbous is necessarily a pot, and vice versa. Beyond being different as mutually inclusive phenomena, a definition and its definiendum must be mutually pervasive. Whatever is the one is necessarily the other, both ways. Thus, a proper definition must include each and everything that is referred to by its own definiendum, not more and not less, and there must be at least one thing that illustrates that phenomena. So that sounds all very nice and tidy, but I don't think in our lives it actually works like that. Do you? Yeah? Do you think that, like cup, exactly what is the range of what we call cup? Yeah? And to develop a definition that would include that range and nothing more and nothing less. Like, would we include this in the definition of cup? Okay. Would we include this as a mug too? Well, there you go. You can't do it because he's saying that there's only one definition for one definiendum. And only one definiendum for one definition. Yeah?
But that's where what you said last week is that's an illustration. And it is an illustration because
this is an illustration. But in defining something, what he just said, a proper definition must include each and everything that is referred to by its own definiendum. Not more and not less.
Right. So the definition is each and everything that fits that description.
Yeah.
And if you just have one, it's an illustration.
Yeah, but does this fit the description? Is this a mug? Is it a cup? Yeah, if you say yes to both, but then they have to have different definitions.
But mug is defined as a specific kind of cup. Like you could say that's a red cup. Or you say it's a mug, it means it's a
Doesn't mug have a particular flavor to it that's different than a cup?
No, it says the definition of it says that it's a kind of a large cup, large cylindrical cup.
Okay, so
with a handle.
Okay, but then if it's a large thing, then this is anyway. I said what I have to say. Okay, but the thing is that if he's saying that everything has to match up, then an object has to be, we could say that this thing is a cup. We can say it's an impermanent phenomena. We can say it's it's an illustration of many different kinds of things. Okay, so if you categorize mug as a subcategory of cup, so it's a mug, it's a cup. But I have when I say mug and cup, I get different images in my mind. Do you? Yeah, I get quite different images in my mind for mug and cup.
When we started this book, Daniel Perdue said this philosophical approach works with things that have definitions. So he has to work with certain, I don't even know if it would work for the classification of species, because there's gray areas between them, Mm-hmm. But a lot of things in science, like in mathematics have very clear lines. Maybe some things in science, maybe some things in philosophy, but I think in culture, I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, we do it in medicine, they give diagnoses of things, but those There's always like that.
Yeah,
People are all
so
over
many
the board from
flavors.
that.
Yeah. So, you want to include the range, is what he's saying. Include the range. So then you have to have a very specific definition that includes all those things and nothing more. Yeah, and nothing less. And that's very difficult to come by, and make sure that everybody agrees exactly what that is. Okay? And so I'm thinking, and I'm bringing all this up. I mean, I could just read this and like not talk about any of this stuff. But the reason I'm bringing this up is here we can see how we human beings, we want to set up a system where everything is neat and clean and is not going to change, and everybody's exactly on the same page and knows exactly what everybody else is talking about. And we want to set up something like that so that we don't get confused. And it sounds good, and it's great, but it doesn't work. Yeah? It doesn't work because we all have different ways of seeing things and different language and different labels and the way we define things ourselves, it's different. So if we just accept this as a system, and go ahead, we can learn a lot. But I'm throwing the wrench in the whole thing and challenging the basis of making such a system. That's what I always did in school, too. So, yeah?
I think we know a lot of definiendums and their definitions without knowing that string word that describes the definition. So we have what we would in English call the definition.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we know a lot of objects and their names, to put it in English.
Yeah.
But we don't always know that string of words that describes it. So you have one idea what it means and I have another.
Exactly.
If you didn't know what a cup was and someone said, "Oh, that is it," and just showed you an illustration, then you might think that it has to have a lid.
Yeah.
Or you might think that a wine glass would be a cup too.
Uh-huh.
What? No, but the string of words describes the definition. And without having that string of words, a lot of times we don't know the details of what it means. We don't know that range they're talking about.
Yeah. Like I think what he's saying is there could be a different word for that and for this. Yeah. Because having a lid or not having a lid makes a big difference in its functionality. So you could theoretically have different words for the two of them.
Yeah, but I guess what I was saying by mentioning the lid is if I just told someone that's a cup, then they might see something that doesn't have a lid and not think it's a cup because that was the illustration.
Right. And lots of times that happens in our life. Yeah. People point something out to us and we think, that we know the definition of that and we don't exactly. And you start calling other things by that name.
And also with having more than one name, he actually says in here that everything is a common locus of more than one thing.
Yeah, but further on in the chapter, he says there's one definition for one name. So that's not matching.
Right, but he says that way back when he describes the definition to permanent phenomena.
And he said what?
He used because it includes common locus, and he describes what that means, and he says everything is a common locus of at least two things. Like you're a common locus of a woman,
and
a human, and an American, and a Buddhist.
Okay, recall that any two phenomena that are different are existents that are not exactly the same. We read that already. We're up here. So any particular definition and its definiendum are mutually inclusive, but they must relate to in a very particular way. Lati Rinpoche laid out the following method for establishing the relationship between a particular definition and its definiendum. Here it is better to use the example of color and its definition, that which is suitable as a hue, rather than a pot and its definition, because it is easier for us to intuit the meaning. Okay, so there already I have, what is suitable to be called a hue. That means you have to understand what hue is in order to understand what color is. Now, what's the definition of hue? Color. Hue isn't a shape. Shade, yeah. Okay. So already, yeah. No, I'm deliberately doing this. Like I said, I could read it without questioning any of these things. And I'll go through and do that. But what I'm pointing out is what I consider inconsistencies.
Well, I don't know. I guess I don't see it the same way, because suitable as a hue is a string of words. The words are suitable as a hue. But here it's referring to something that you actually have seen, and they're just describing it.
Yeah.
So if you were a cow, you might know the difference between green and brown.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't use any words for it. Mm-hmm. We just happen to use words because we're human. But that brown is suitable to be brown, and that green grass is suitable to be green grass to a cow, and they don't use any words.
Mm-hmm.
So there, we're just using, we have to use some words, but those aren't the object.
Yeah. But
Suitable
what I'm getting at is if you have color being we are using words here. If color is the definiendum, and that which is suitable to be a hue is the definition, then you have to understand hue before you understand color.
Understand hue in terms of an object, but not the word hue.
Yeah.
Not the word hue. A child doesn't have to know the word hue to start learning colors.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
See, this is where you're mixing up the words of the definition that describe the definition and the thing.
Except if somebody says, what is the definition of color?
It's the words suitable as a hue.
No, because that's what he just got done saying.
I'm sorry.
The definition
we describe it that way, but it is, but it's an object. It's that thing that's suitable to be described as suitable as a hue. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but I'm also saying that when we learn, if I'm, if I ask you, well, what's the definition? What's a color? And you say, it's something suitable to be a hue. Then if I don't know, I don't know the meaning of hue, I'm not going to understand what you mean. If I say, what's a color, and you say this, I'm still not going to understand what a color is, because this is also cloth. It's also it's also a cushion. It's if I just point my finger to some object, I could be indicating a whole bunch of different things.
I agree with you. That's true, but when we're learning something, the mind is, like the example they gave with when Atisha went to Tibet. They tried to teach him the word for, he pointed to a boulder, and they said, what is that? And they said, that's a stone. And later on he said, I have a boulder in my shoe.
Uh-huh.
Right? That's because the words the definiendum they used, or the way he encapsulated what the definition was wrong. See, like if you point to that and you say, if you ask me, what is suitable, what is a color? Yeah, give me some examples of color. I could point to all those different colors on that tanka. Mm-hmm. But you're right. Unless I know that we're referring to that. But when you're learning, you have to find a way to differentiate those things. And unless you learn that correctly, you'll be just like Atisha.
Right.
So, yeah, we use words to figure these things out as kids, but even cows learn these things without words.
Mm-hmm.
So there is kind of learning that discerns the objects.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that discerns the objects. But I'm just talking about setting up a system here, and the way it's defining things. Is that, holding water? Is this accurately describing what we're trying to describe? In the way of, does it work? Are things exactly like this?
I don't know. I think that actually in that Anne Klein book where they talk about how you learn names and things, to me it's completely fascinating because it's the example they give is so amazing. It's like, and they say we do this is the way our mind works. And it's the way cows' minds work probably too. But like say you've never seen a car and someone shows you a car and it's a V-dub or a Porsche. And then right then you make a generality. And you can see, you don't have to see that car and you'll know another car because our minds work that way. This is what Jeffrey was talking about, I think, in the mind only thing, when we've habituated ourselves to naming. We are karmic beings, and the way I understand this whole process of we have this habituation to create these generalities this way so that we can actually learn. And when we have them correct, we know the difference between a truck and a car. When we don't have them correct, we just have a vehicle, and now we've got the generality wrong, like Atisha did. But our minds do that from the very get-go. But then it has to be discerned right, and that's where it's messy.
Yeah.
That's where the kid makes the mistake in class, and they say that's purple, and they know we're talking about cloth now. They mix up what they're pointing to. He was thinking about the color, and they were thinking about the material. That's how we get. That's how we learn.
Okay. So, in the form of a syllogism, the method for establishing something as the definition of its own particular definiendum, is the subject, that which is suitable as a hue, is the definition of color, because 1, it and color are ascertained as having the 8 approaches of pervasion that exist between a definition and a definiendum, and 2, it and color are established in the relationship of a definition and a definiendum. So in some ways the definition is talking about, they say it's the substantial object, but it still has to do with the description, it seems to me. The first main component of the reason of this syllogism is that which is suitable as a hue and color are ascertained as having the 8 approaches of pervasion that exist between a definition and definiendum. The 8 approaches of pervasion that exist between color and that which is suitable as a hue. So I'm still, that which is suitable as a hue doesn't give you much information. You have to understand what hue is first.
Selected topics book. So they actually define this as that which is suitable as a color.
That's how they define hue.
That's how they define color.
Color, that which is suitable as a color. And form is that which is suitable as a form. In English...
Yeah, this is just a translation.
Yeah, but the point is, it doesn't give you any information. It's referring to common experience. But if you don't know what the object is, and if you don't know what the word is, it doesn't give you any information to be able to identify it.
Kind of sidesteps the issue. It kind of sidesteps the issue.
Yeah, totally. That's and if you in this country, if, in your English class, they ask you for a definition of form and you say that which is suitable for form, they'll say, don't you know anything? You can never use the word of the definiendum in the definition because that would mean that you already would know what the definiendum was in order to understand the definition. Okay, anyway, the 8 approaches of privation that exist between color, color and that which is suitable as a color. Thank you. Whatever is a color is necessarily suitable as a hue. Whatever is suitable as a hue is necessarily a color. Whatever is not a color is necessarily not suitable as a hue. Whatever is not suitable as a hue is necessarily not color. If there is a color, then there is necessarily something that is suitable as a hue. If there is something suitable as a hue, then there is necessarily something that is there is necessarily a color. If there is not a color, then there is necessarily not something that is suitable as a hue. If there is not something that is suitable as a hue, then there is necessarily not a color.
Enlightenment is in the details. So Jeffrey said. So Venerable Chuni, where did you get that suitable as a color?
It's in that little collected topics manual I brought back.
Oh, okay. Because in this one in the debate, Daniel produced a debate book, the Tibetan is not the same at all. When they say definition of a color, that which is suitable as a hue, and they give the Tibetan word for color and the Sanskrit word for color, and then the Tibetan words for suitable as a hue. There's not even a common word between the two in Tibetan.
Oh, so they have different definitions.
Yeah.
But I bet if you look in Oxford and Merriam, whatever it is, dictionaries don't always have the same definitions.
Yeah, that's true.
For something. Yeah, what is look up color?
The property possessed by an object of producing different sensations on the eye as a result of the way it reflects or emits light.
Oh, that's much clearer, isn't it? That's much clearer. Look up hue. Let's see if they're...
As I said before, it's a color or shade.
Huh.
And there is a sub-definition, the attribute of a color by virtue of which it is discernible as red, green, etc., and which is dependent on its dominant wavelength and dependent on intensity or lightness. And it's also character or aspect. I mean, it's
So pretty similar, just using slightly different words.
Does it still tell you what it is?
Yeah. Well, the different light waves, and seeing that, if you've had 4th grade science, then that will mean something to you. And it gives us more information than that which is suitable as a hue. But then there comes a question, is white a color? And is black a color? Yeah. And so according to science, you may have one thing, and according to common language, you may have another thing. Okay. The 8 approaches of privation play on the facts that if something is the one, then it is necessarily the other, and that the presence of the one necessitates the presence of the other. Any particular definition and its definiendum are necessarily coextensive in terms of privations of being and in privations of existence. So if it is a color, it's necessarily suitable as a hue, or if there is a color, then there necessarily is a hue. So 2 ways of putting it, one in terms of being and the other in terms of, what did I just say? Existence. And it's confusing because we usually think of being and existence as being the same thing. Okay. But coming back to that, okay, as kids, we learn our colors. Yeah. In English, would does a child know the definition of what red is? They know what red is, but do they know the definition of what red is? Yeah. So maybe this is what they mean by the definition being the object, because maybe in Tibetan you would say, yes, they know the definition of color. Yeah, in the system. If you know what your colors are, although no, you can know the illustrations without knowing the definition.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really defined the illustration correctly yet. Because what I read about that, like, you say the cup. The cup can't be an illustration of a cup.
Right.
It has to be an illustration of something bigger.
Bigger, right. Yeah, the cup is an illustration of impermanent thing.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So, with what you were just saying.
Yeah. No, but what I was saying is if we know the colors, yeah, do we know what we know our colors? Do we know the definition of a color? If we know all of the names of our colors, do we know the definition of color?
In the English term, probably not.
Yeah, but in this system, would they say that you would know the definition of...
You know the definition before the definiendum.
Right, but we know that. But if you know what the names of the colors are, in this system, do you know what a color is? Do you know what a definition of color is? Because you can identify illustrations, but not necessarily know what the definiendum is. Yeah?
You would know the definitions. But
so I'm wondering, how then do you know? I mean, it just has to be practical, how you learn language, to figure out what a definition of something is. Yeah, it's puzzling to think about. I mean, when you're a kid learning something, okay, you learn all these different names for colors. Yeah. And then you learn the name color, and somebody says that is a color. But you know the definition of color.
The object color. See, if you would use the word object, it would be less confusing, because definition, I can't tell when you're talking about it in the English sense of the word or the Tibetan. The Tibetan is always the object.
Yeah, but that's what's confusing, about trying to do this, and saying that the definition is the object.
You have to start there, I think.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll go on. These 8 pervasions exist between any, did I read that? Any mutually inclusive phenomena, whether or not they are a definition and its definiendum. For instance, products and impermanent phenomena, though not a definition and definiendum, are mutually inclusive. So whatever is a product is necessarily an impermanent phenomena, and vice versa. And if there is a product, then there is necessarily an impermanent phenomena, and so on for all 8. So what he's getting at here is that definition and definiendum, if it's a definition and definiendum, then it's necessarily things that are mutually inclusive. But if it's something that's mutually inclusive, it's not necessarily a definition and definiendum. Okay? Since the 8 approaches of privation exist not only between a definition and its definiendum, but also between 2 mutually inclusive phenomena, the reason given to justify that suitable as a hue is the definition of color specifies that the 2 are ascertained as having the 8 approaches of privation, and that exists between a definition and definiendum. Okay, so that's how you have to specifically say that they're definition and definiendum. In this way, the reason includes other mutually inclusive phenomena, such as products and impermanent phenomena, that although they have 8 approaches of privation, are not a definition and its definiendum. Okay, so if you look back, you look above at what the method for establishing something as the definition of its own particular definiendum is, the subject, that which is suitable as a hue, is the definition of color, because it and color are ascertained as having the 8 approaches of pervasion that exist between a definition and definiendum. So it has to specify there the 8 that exists between a definition and definiendum. The first point can't just be it and color are ascertained as having the 8 approaches of pervasion, because there's other things that have the 8 approaches of pervasion, such as impermanent and functioning thing, but they aren't in the relationship of definition definiendum. Okay? The second part of the reason above makes another distinction between a definition and its definiendum on the one hand, and other types of mutually inclusive phenomena. The reason specifies that suitable as a hue and color are established in the relationship of definition and definiendum. According to Lati Rinpoche, this specification means that in order to ascertain color with reliable cognition, a person must first ascertain that which is suitable as a hue with reliable cognition. The claim is that a person must first have a correct understanding of the definition, the actual object, before that person can have a correct understanding of the definiendum, the conventionality or name that designates that object. And so that is going back to the stone and boulder thing. In order to understand with reliable cognition the meaning of the term color, a person must first be acquainted with the existence that are suitable to be demonstrated to an eye consciousness as a hue: blue, yellow, white, red, and so forth. This implies that there are persons who have ascertained that which is suitable as a hue with reliable cognition, but have not ascertained the definiendum color with reliable cognition. Okay. For instance, a child untrained in language or a cow might have a correct understanding of that which is suitable as a hue, but not have a correct understanding of the name color. On the other hand, a person who correctly knows the meaning of color, yet does not know that which is suitable as a hue, is not possible. Okay, so it's possible to know the definition without knowing the definiendum, but it's not possible to correctly know the definiendum without knowing the definition. But we can see in our lives, lots of times we think we understand a definiendum, but we don't. And in our mind, we have a different definition for it. And sometimes we may think we understand the definition, but we would call it something else, not what the dictionary calls it. Yeah. So it's interesting for me in the writing that I do. Sometimes I stop and I look up words that I already know the meaning of, because I suspect that maybe I may use that word in a way that is not exactly, doesn't accord with its definition. So I go and look it up anyway, even though I know the word, to make sure that I'm using it in the appropriate way. Yeah, there's a lot of words like that. Yeah, today I looked up the word adage. Yeah. Now, somebody said to you, what does adage mean? Could you give a definition of adage?
It's a saying.
Hmm?
Wise saying. Yeah, an old saying.
Yeah. It's an old or wise saying. Okay. But look how we had to stop and think about that. Yeah. And then when we started looking for illustrations of adage, what about some contemporary things? Would they be included in adage?
Goes around, comes around.
Huh?
What goes around comes around.
Yeah. So is that an adage? That's a new thing.
Oh, no.
Yeah. But it kind of would be an adage, wouldn't it? We wouldn't say as the old adage goes. But what would you call it then? Slogan? Yeah. So what is, if it's not an adage, what is what goes around comes around? ADAGE.
Yeah, it says a proverb or short statement expressing a general truth. So it doesn't have to be old.
But we always say as the old adage goes, don't we? We never say as the new adage goes.
But if you had to be old, you wouldn't have to say old.
That's true. But we never include something new. That's strange. Yeah, what was it? Oh, I was using the phrase, because I was working on the chapter on the 6 perfections. So I was using the phrase, practice makes perfect. And it fits, talking about, we practice the 6 perfections, because practice makes perfect. Okay. Since definitions are the actual objects, as a bulbous is a real pot, the characterizer itself, specific definitions cannot be in turn defined again. For instance, there is no definition of a bulbous. However, even though specific definitions cannot be defined, there is a definition of definition itself. Okay, so this means definition as a general category, not the definition of a specific thing. So the definition of definition is that which is a triply qualified substantial existent. Yeah? Now that's very helpful, but you have to learn a lot to understand what that means. Okay? A definition is called a substantial existent because it is the actual object. Actually, not just because it's the actual object, but because it's suitable to perform a function. Okay? Because space is an actual object, but it's not suitable to perform a function. Okay. The meaning or referent. Okay, a definition is called a substantial existent because it is the actual object, I object, the meaning or referent of its definiendum. So if a definition is triply qualified, what are the 3 qualities of every definition? In the Tutor's Collective Topics, the author Prabhuchok Jompa Gyaltso lays out the 3 qualities of a definition in the form of a syllogism. There is a way to adduce the 3 qualities of a substantial existent because it is reasonable to adduce the 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. In general, it is a definition. It is established with its illustrations, and it does not define anything other than that which is its own definiendum. Okay, so you see, by that very way it's explained there, the bulbous cannot define anything else but its definiendum pot. And what I was saying is the definition that they gave us describes lots of things that are not pots. I don't think that this definition is subtle enough. or specific enough.
What's the subject of this syllogism? I don't get that.
Consider the three, consider the way to I think the way to induce the three qualities of a substantial existent is the subject. And it's reasonable to adduce them. And the reason is because, in general, it is a definition. It is established with its illustrations. And it doesn't define anything other than that which is its own definiendum.
Yeah, if the subject is a way to adduce the three qualities of a substantial existent, I think then the thesis is that it exists. So even though it's worded as there is, I think there is the predicate. It's just put in a backwards form.
No, if we say,
what are we saying about
no, because
a way that
because
it is?
A way exists because it is reasonable to adduce.
And then the reason is because it is reasonable to adduce the three, and then it's described. So if a way to adduce the three qualities of substantial existent is the subject, what are we trying to say about the subject? That it is. There is. So I think there is actually the predicate. It's just reversed in the way it's written. That's
so
what we're trying to prove
the way
about.
to adduce the three qualities of a substantial existent exists.
That's what we're trying to prove.
Oh,
There
because it is reasonable to adduce the three.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then that becomes...
Yeah. So you're saying something exists because da-da-da. Okay, and you're giving a definition of that term. Okay. For example, a bulbous flat-based phenomena able to perform the function of holding water is the triply qualified substantial existent of pot because here in the example, the subject is a bulbous and the predicate is the triply qualified substantial existent of a pot. Yeah, so it's different than the two are. The first one's just describing it in general. This is giving a specific instance of that. Okay, because one, in general, it is a definition. Okay, so that's true. The bulbous is a definition. It is established with its illustrations. So that's true. We know that a clay bulbous is an illustration of the bulbous. And it does not define anything other than pot. Wrong. You can hear the buzzer on A Price of Right. The Price is Right, whenever they chose the wrong thing. Okay. You didn't watch The Price is Right when you... It's a game show.
I got it.
Okay.
And then the chair. Russian roulette.
Oh no, Russian roulette means something else. Yeah. Okay. How is that really? Did Russia invent that? Russian roulette.
I don't know. It's something historical. From maybe 90s, 80s, 90s.
Oh, it's old. Yeah, we'll have to find out. Where did it come from? Okay. Is Russian roulette Russian? Yeah, just because it's called Russian roulette doesn't necessarily mean it came from Russia. Yeah. Okay. Huh? Roulette? It's a French word. Okay. First, in general, a bulbous is renowned as a definition, not a definiendum. Second, the bulbous is established with its illustrations, such as a copper bulbous, and a stainless steel one. Okay. We know the bulbous independent upon knowing its illustrations. And third, the bulbous is not a definition of anything other than a pot. A definition cannot have more than one definiendum. That's difficult because there's some words that are totally synonymous and that have the same definition. Yeah. I mean, the one with hue and color was they were pretty close. Just as there is a definition of definition in general, so there is a definition of definiendum in general. A definiendum is just defined as that which is a triply qualified imputed existent. That gives you a lot of information. A definiendum is called an imputed existent because it is the name imputed to or ascribed to those things that have the quality of its definition. An imputed existence, it is called an imputed existence because it is the name imputed to or ascribed to those things that have the quality of its definition. I'm not sure because they say that the person is an imputed existent. Is the person an imputed existent because it's the name imputed to or ascribed to those things that have the quality of its definition? That's not the definition.
The definition is a being who is imputed independence upon any of the 5 aggregates.
Yeah. And some say independence on all the aggregates, and some say independence. See, they can't even agree on the definition. Some say any, some say all. Yeah. Hmm?
Does this school always say any one of?
I don't know. I have to look at. I don't know. Yeah. The Prasangika, as I remember it, say is imputed to the 5 aggregates, the collection of the 5 aggregates. Yeah. But yeah, 4 or 5 aggregates. But they, but also. The way, in this school, the way they define imputed existence is different than in the Prasangika, too. So that's interesting. What happens if you have one definiendum and different schools define it differently? That doesn't fulfill this definition in here. Because in this definition, there's only one definition for each definiendum. Yeah. So then when the schools define it differently.
But isn't this really just outlining the rules of the game?
Yeah.
Right? So yeah, different schools, but they're not going to debate in different schools. They're going to agree that we're going to debate this in this school, or they're going to agree that they're going to debate, but that their terms to play the game, you have to know that when you get this pass go to collect $200 card, that it means this spot.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So it can't be actually extrapolated to the whole universe.
Yeah, but it isn't specified when they say that.
Yes.
That, they're not including that very important please note. This, we're talking about this as if it applies to everything, but it actually doesn't. Okay, and it makes you wonder, because then, is for, let's say, science and Buddhism to discuss anything, everybody's going to have to learn each other's system and define the words in a similar way, even before you can start to discuss things. So that's going to be interesting. I mean, that's one of the problems. How do you define mind? Buddhism has a specific definition. Science, maybe you could cobble one together, but the word means two very different things. Yeah? So how do you have a discussion?
But isn't that part of what the whole mind-life thing that's been going on for decades now is trying to come to understand?
Yeah. The difference in how you're defining these things. Yeah. But each system says we have the correct definition. Yes, you see. So if you want to play the game, you have to have our definition of it. Okay, so a definiendum is called an imputed existent, because it is the name imputed to or ascribed to those things that have the quality of its definition. The name of a thing is just laid onto that thing by common convention. We agree to call it that, but the name is not part of its character in the way that being a functioning thing is part of the character of pot. But this really points out how we reify things, because we think the meaning of jerk is in that term. So if somebody calls us a jerk, this isn't just, a common convention. It's like that word in and of itself means something. Yeah. And so actually this is what we're coming to. You can see in a lot of the discussion nowadays where different cultures are offended by the different words and what they mean. It's because people are taking it as the words, there's some almost inherent existent meaning behind that sound. And it's not something that's just conventionally imputed, but there's a whole lot of meaning behind it. And then we argue. Yeah. And then, don't use this word. This word is hurtful. Use that word. Yeah. And so everybody has their different rules about what words you can use and what words you can't use, because different people have different definitions and different imputations about the meaning of different words. And we don't all know each other's definitions and different meanings, and so then people get offended. And once we're offended, then we blame. Yeah? And once we blame, we create division. And that's a big problem. And it's all just imputed phenomena. So the tutor, per bucho jumpagazzo, also, we described that. Sorry, I don't have any way of marking in here where I left off. So then I'm always searching for where I left off.
You didn't? That's where you're at.
Where I'm at, for example, a pot is the Tripoli, or no. There is a way to adduce the three qualities of an imputed existent, because it is reasonable to adduce the three. 1, in general, it is a definiendum. 2, it is established with its illustrations. And 3, it is not the definiendum of anything other than just its own definition. For example, a pot is the triply qualified imputed existent of a bulbous. Because, 1, in general, it is a definiendum. 2, it is established with its illustrations, such as gold pots, copper pots, and so on. And 3, it is not a definiendum of anything other than a bulbous. Okay. Now here, what's interesting is when it gives the second point, it is established with its illustrations. Yeah, for the definition, okay, that second quality is if for the example is worded a little bit different, okay, because gold pot, copper pot, and so on are illustrations of pot, but they aren't illustrations of a bulbous. Okay? Why not?
Because you have to know bulbous first.
You have to know bulbous
You have to know the meaning of bulbous first.
for what?
There are no illustrations of the definition. Because it's the thing itself.
No, we just said here when we were talking about the definition of pot, okay, yeah, that second, the bulbous is established with its illustrations, such as a bulbous flat-based copper phenomena, a bulbous stainless steel phenomena, okay, and in the definiendum, the illustrations were, you know, you could say a gold pot, a copper pot. Why are gold pot and copper pot illustrations of pot, but they aren't illustrations of the definition of pot?
When I read this, I got confused because later in the illustration section it says gold pot is not a definition of pot. Yeah, because if you know gold pot, you already know pot.
Yeah, that's the point.
So why is it being listed here as an illustration?
It's an illustration of pot.
Oh, like a general.
Yeah. If it's a it's true. It does say that a gold pot isn't an illustration. It isn't an illustration of the definition. No, it is an illustration of the definition of pot. Yeah.
Gold pot?
No, it's not. Okay, so the gold pot is not an illustration of the definition of pot, but it is, by this, an illustration of pot.
Yeah. So later on he says that the illustration of pot is a bulb. You can say it's the bulbous gold. It's the gold bulbus. That is an illustration, but
no,
not
that's
gold
an
pot.
illustration of the definition of pot,
Yeah. I know
not the
but
illustration
later on in
of
the
pot.
illustration section,
Huh?
I don't know.
Does he
what page.
say that exactly?
Yes,
I don't have
313.
pages in here.
Where it says, for instance, a gold pot is not an illustration of a pot. Because if a person has ascertained a gold pot correctly, then that person would necessarily have ascertained the pot correctly. Right. And he says, however, a bulbous flat-based gold phenomenon able to perform the function of holding water is a suitable basis for illustrating what a pot is. So,
Okay. Yeah, so it does seem a bit contradictory, doesn't it? Yeah? What is...
That's why they had that story about. That's funny. Earlier in the book, they were talking about the monks, and every year they went back They were talking about gold pots and copper pots.
Oh, yeah.
The guy was saying, why do you come every year talking about gold pots and copper pots? It was funny because we'll be doing the same thing.
Yeah, right. Anyway, who has a gold pot to start with? Yeah? Does a gold pot even exist? In what?
Could
Oh, okay.
could it be possible though that gold pot is not an illustration of the definition, but it can be an illustration of the definiendum?
Well, that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Because here it's saying that gold pot is is an illustration of the definiendum pot. But in what she just read,
No, it's saying it's established.
it is established with its illustration, such as a gold pot. Doesn't that mean that a gold pot is an illustration? But then what she just read,
But it's not an illustration of a pot, as in a definiendum. I mean, a definition, the object itself. But it can be an illustration of pot, as in the label.
say that again.
Quite clear, but it seems to kind of make sense that gold pot is not an illustration of the object itself, because if you know,
The object itself being pot.
yes, but it could be an illustration of pot, as in like
Yeah, but the
general
object
term.
itself is the definition.
Yes,
So we've already agreed with that a gold pot is not
yes,
an illustration of a bulbous.
yes.
Okay.
Yes, I agree.
Anyway, put it on the Geshe list, whoever's keeping the Geshe list, which is like every paragraph.
This guy's lucky he died, or we would get him here.
Okay, so we're going to stop here. We're not at a good stopping point, but we've already gone over time. So, yeah. So think about this. Okay, and for the next 5 weeks, Venerable Sangha Kadra will do some things about low rig with you, going more into the definitions and stuff like that. Because we just covered the 7 awarenesses very briefly, and the way he talked about them here isn't the way they usually are in the low rig text. Yeah.
This gets to your question about how is the definition the thing itself? Well, I would think that if that were the case, the definition would be the thing itself. It wouldn't be seen as the separate entity. It sort of shows that, the Tibetans or whoever developed the system, they recognize that a definition is not the thing itself. It's this abstract entity.
No, but they just said in this system, the definition is the thing itself.
The definition of definition is that which is a triply qualified substantial existence.
That's just talking about definition. There's a difference between talking about definition and definition of a specific thing.
But if the definition was a specific thing, you couldn't say that there is a definition just separately floating out there. Right? If a definition is a thing.
Yes, this was my question from last year, from last week. Yeah. So I think, what they're just trying to do is find some way to differentiate between imputed existent and substantial existent. And that's one of the ways they chose to do it. But I would like Geshe to reply to that. Yeah, because there's still, it's like, okay, that's the way they say it in the system, but it still doesn't, I still don't understand exactly what they mean by it.
Or you need Skype teachings with Daniel.
Hmm?
Or you need Skype. Oh, he's dead.
That's what he said. If he wasn't dead, we would bring him here.
Can you talk about the generality definition, how it compares to an object?
No, it's the question I had from last week. Yeah. Yeah. Uh-huh. Okay, we've got to finish soon. Otherwise, somebody's going to do something. Fall
I'm
asleep.
just going to share a story from the past. But back to the cup.
Okay.
Many years ago when I was in Europe, there were these two Canadians. I was one of them. And we went into this restaurant. And this person ordered a cup of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And he was brought this bowl. And I will never forget the look on his face. And it was like, he didn't know what to do with it because he ordered a cup of coffee. So then he, in his very poor French, asked for a spoon. So the waiter looked at him with the same kind of look that the guy had on his face. And he brought him a really big spoon. And so he spooned the coffee from the bowl, which was the cup.
Yeah.
And that was the only way he could drink it.
Yeah. But you know, we also go in a restaurant and we ask for a cup of soup. But they don't serve it in a cup, they serve it in a bowl. But we should send it back and say, I want a cup of soup. But then some menus have cups of soup and bowls of soup.
And just very briefly, I had an American friend visit and I asked him, what would you like to eat? And he said, I'd like some pastries. So I take him to this Chinese bakery, which I think is the best bakery in town. He's like, these are not pastries.
No.
I was really confused. I was like, what do you mean? These are pastries. What else did you want?
Yeah.
You know, he's like, apple pie. Huh? Where would we get that? So it was like a real...
Right. Yeah.
Stepfather in Colombia, the word pie in the same spelling in Spanish means foot. Foot. And so he was walking down a commercial street and saw this sign that said pretty lindo pie, which he interpreted as pretty pie because there was the word written in the same way. So he went to get a pie, and it was a shoe store.
We're stopping. We all have stories like this. Okay. But don't send it as a note. Don't put it in an email, and the answer is no. Oh, a grouse flew into the window here. Oh. You have to be careful in the writing cabin because sometimes they fly in the windows there. Yeah. Yeah, they.
Did the strings help with that?
Yeah, it does, and on the yeah.